In the name of Allah, we shall start the first session after we have listened to the main speaker. And now we have a seminar and about ethics and environment, problem and solutions and changing behaviors. The moderator of this session will be Dr. Patrick Lode from Georgetown University. And now I give him the floor. Dr. Lode, please, the floor is yours.
It is my pleasure to welcome you to the first session, which is devoted to the environment. And the question that is at stake is, can there be a protection of the environment without religious values? So we will explore this question as it befits the format of the CILE conference, both in text and context. So we have practitioners and scholars. And I don't want to take time from the speakers, so I'll try to play as minimal a role as possible. And that's the reason why I'm going actually to introduce to you right away our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dr. Saif Ibn Ali Al-Hajari, who is the former vice chairperson of Qatar Foundation Board of Directors. He is also the founder and chairman of the Friends of Environment Center, FEC, and the chairman of the Qatari Committee for Sports and Environment. And today he is going to speak to us about e-waste from an environmental and moral perspective. So Dr. Al-Hajari, please.
Thank you.
In the name of Allah, and a blessing be upon Prophet Muhammad. It's my pleasure to welcome you in the greetings of Islam. So peace be upon you. I will start by saying that we live in a world with a crisis of environment, which have an impact, a negative impact on humanity. Since the accumulation, the civilization accumulation for the humanity which evolved and then collapsed was not due to the knowledge and but due to losing its ethics and morals. And hence now humanity live in difficult times, in a crisis, despite the knowledge and the cutting-edge technology and although all the tools and available mechanisms. But we know that humans are suffering in all around the world because we live in a time of losing values and ethics. And today I'm going to talk to you on a small environmental issue, and we will deal with it from its environmental perspective and ethical perspective. And I chose to talk about e-wastes or electronic wastes. The e-waste in the current time became a headache for the world because of the environmental and health hazards resulting from its accumulation and obsolescence, and also due to the difficulty of get rid of the e-waste or recycle some of their substance. And the e-waste and substance are all electronic devices, mobiles, televisions, computers, electronic games, which contain unsafe substances like lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, nickel, silver, beryllium, and copper. And of course, there are some heavy metals that are harmful to the environment. And also, what deepen this problem is the prevalence of consumerism and the awareness of responsible purchasing, which made several electronic devices replaced before the end of their lifespan. And at the current times, we need to stand uh, against these unethical practices and also some practices of some countries that export these the e-waste, and they export them to least developed countries on the form of support, but their true intention is to get rid of it in a safe manner. And as we know that the Islam and other religious uh, prohibit one to harm the others. Of course, this problem is increasing because the e-waste is now not only harmful to the ground, to the soil, but also to the air and also to the space, because some waste are sent to the space, and these waste are now very dangerous, and they are increasing every year with 33%. So this accumulation will have a negative impact on the earth. So now the population of the world has reached 7 billion people, and we see that 7 kilograms per person if e-waste is generated, and hence the earth will sink in the chaos of the e-waste. And throwing these waste in dumpsters and what it contains of toxic substance will contaminate the surrounding environment and will pollute the earth and soil and water. Of course, the damages of the e-waste or the harms of the e-waste on the will have and it's harmful to human health and safety because it contains chemical substance, because electronics contain more than 1,000 chemical substances, including smelters, polyphenol chloride, heavy metals, and plastic substance, and fumes, and other substance that the electronics contained. And also some connectors and some circuits are used in manufacturing electronic devices, which are very harmful and might reach the food chain of the human and might also extend to harm the environment with all its contents. Of course, there are efforts, however shy efforts, to deal with the e-wastes in a safe manner, and some environment activists try to spread awareness and urge governments and private sector in order to recycle e-waste on all levels, national, regional, and international. And we need to all to work on a safe manner to get rid of the waste and also find some replacement for the hazardous material in e-waste. Of course, there are some primitive ways that are used by many countries around the world for to deal with e-waste. Uh, One of these tools is to detoxicate chemical substance and even storing the storage of the e-waste. But of course, this is just a delay and reduce the opportunities of recycling the e-waste. The another mean for getting rid of waste is burying them or burn them, but of course that will create more contamination to the environment. The point that I have mentioned and is one of the solutions that some of the countries adapted and which are unethical to export these e-waste to least developed countries. There are also some safe tools or means to deal with e-waste, and these are divided into three phases. The first one is detoxification phase, and while getting rid of these waste, we need also to protect those who work on this process, and also dismantling and declassification of the e-waste, which means classifying the wastes to make it easy to recycle the waste. And the last phase, the remaining of these material will be recycled and placed in a safe place so that it doesn't find its way to uh, the environment. Of course, the very important element here in all these processes is ethics. Because if we do not instill these ethics in all our practices and actions, all the means and techniques will be incomplete, because the e-waste problem requires adopting some mechanical solutions in addition to in addition to open the door for means to raise awareness and the conscience of a human to of a humans. We need people to start thinking about everything they do, whether a housewife, mother or father. They need to upbring their children on an environmental culture way, and values are built from the beginning, from the early years. The man who works in a factory, he needs also to be trustworthy on his career and need to present this safe product. So we this is should be the basis in dealing with these issues. So if our ethical legacy, if the ethical legacy is for all human, and if it was a set of values, of course, Islam was as a religion that has promoted the values, and these values will ensure development and growth and welfare of humanities. And as I have started by mentioning that many nations have disappeared because they do not stick to ethics. And here I'm going to go to the Holy Quran with two verses. Uh, uh, Read the first verse reads, corruption has appeared throughout the land and sea by reasons of what the hands of people have. And this indicates that if people do corrupt and if they ruin the environment and if they seize the reformation, the the earth will disappear and people will live in a difficult times. and and of course we all need to do goodness and to good in our actions, aiming to the level of ihsan. And Allah also Almighty says that, and cause not corruption upon the earth after its reformation. So our religion is rich with many environmental values which are frankly a means for a better life. And in conclusion, I have some recommendations which I would want to share with you. among these recommendations to conduct comprehensive study to evaluate e-waste in order to identify closely uh, identify the harms of the e-waste and how to deal safely with them. The second recommendation establishes specialized institutions to manage and get rid of the e-waste for the purpose also of recycle them. And here also another recommendation, we need to establish an international alliance to put the pressure on companies that manufacture electronic devices to provide less harmful alternatives. And these companies, as you know, that they have a consumerism factor. They only care about profits, and they care less about the health and welfare of the customers. And also we need to set standards and legislations that meets e-waste management. And finally, we need to introduce these concepts related to e-waste in school curriculums and universities. And of course, here the family plays a major role to upbring children on ethical values, on environmental values, and to raise the awareness of uh, the generations. So, of course, by promoting the ethical and religious values would help the future generation to care more about the environment. And we come from nation that has a long history in protecting the environment. So we ask Allah to Almighty to enable us to help the humanity, and peace be upon you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Hajari, for this very informative presentation on electronic waste and for raising ethical issues and making concrete proposals, practical proposals, and to remind us of the importance of the family and training of the young generation. Thank you. The second speaker is Dr. David Dent, who is the Chief Executive of Dent Associates and also the founder of the Pennies Foundation. He's currently a visiting professor at the University of Surrey in the Business School, and as well as special advisor to the UK Parliamentary and Scientific Committee. Dr. Dent is going to speak today about environmental ethics, religious and moral values, the individual, community, business, and government. Dr. Ken.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me to participate in this conference. It's indeed an honour and a privilege to be speaking to you all today. I'm a scientist, and by training, an ecologist, and I specialised, beginning in my career, in a subject that's called integrated pest management. Now, this subject actually came about, this whole discipline came about because of a single publication in 1962 by a person called Rachel Carson. The book was called Silent Spring. What was so interesting about Silent Spring was it attacked the misuse of chemical pesticides used to control insect pests and weeds. And it also talked about how the food crop system was changing and the pollution that was involved in the use of pesticides and how it affected not only just the people who would eat those food crops, but the livestock where the pesticides were also being applied, the pollution of our water and airways, as well as the soil, and destroying the whole of the biodiversity associated with agricultural systems. This was not the only book around that time that was actually important. There was another one, and this was by Paul Ehrlich, called The Population Bomb. And this was published in 1968. And this caused quite a controversy because he argued that, he was a Stanford professor, and he argued that the problems that we had in the world were being caused by population explosion and the fact that we had no longer had the resources left in the world that could be replenished to meet the needs of that growing population. Now that was in 1968. And interestingly enough, we're still talking about the same issues today. But I mention these two books for two reasons. First, they're partially responsible for initiating the establishment of the environmental movement, and in particular for creating the whole field of environmental ethics. There were other players, of course, as well, but they were instrumental. But they also demonstrate how the role of innovation and technology, coupled to economic growth, has been key to creating some of the greatest and largest of our environmental problems. Interestingly, of course, innovation and technology also provides a means by which we can solve some of those problems. So it's a double-edged sword. When we consider whether it's right or wrong to pollute our environment with the industrial processes that produce the commodities we all want to purchase in our shops, or to destroy the natural biodiversity of a rainforest in order to grow agricultural crops that are going to feed people in the region, or even the way we conduct our own lives in the way we travel, dispose of our household waste, or even heat and cool the places that we work and live in, then we're actually addressing the questions associated with environmental ethics. And these sorts of questions are actually relevant, as we've heard before from other speakers. They're relevant to individuals, communities, businesses, and governments. A key aspect of environmental ethics concerns whether we take an anthropocentric approach or not. There you go. Next. Anthropocentric meaning human-centric. If we have an anthropocentric approach, then environmental ethics argues that given mankind's moral standing, each of us should be concerned about the environment. And by extension, we should be concerned about the future of human beings yet to be born. As moral beings, it would appear quite rational to argue that we cannot abdicate responsibility for the future environment because our behaviour now will affect the livelihoods of future generations. However, this then focuses our mind and forces us to consider whether the moral obligation we have to future generations is greater or lesser than the obligation to our current population. Then there is the question of whether animals have the same moral standing as do humans. Do animals have the same rights as humans? If animals do not have moral standing or moral consciences, how can they have moral standing? And how should this moral standing compare to humans? The issues become even more complex if we consider every aspect of an ecosystem. Which parts are more important than others? And how can we know what the future generations are going to require in terms of those parts of the ecosystem? Which bits do we keep? Which bits do we let loose and to die or to be lost? Ecology is that study of those interaction of organisms with each other and the environment. And one approach to environmental ethics has been what's been called deep ecology. And we talk about deep ecology and shallow ecology. Shallow ecology deals with the issues of resource use and pollution. Deep ecology is more of an eco-philosophy. And it came about because of a man called Arne Næss. And Arne's view was that the relationship mankind had with the environment had to be better integrated than it currently was. And he's concerned with a whole philosophy that would not only change our viewpoint, but also change the structures in society in our modern industrial-based way of life. Social ecology is another structure within environmental ethics, promoted by Murray Bookchin. And it's similar to deep ecology, but argues for the much closer integration with our environment, actually living on an equal footing with everything around us, transforming society into smaller communities based on sustainable agriculture, participation through democracy and freedom without domination. All sounds very good in theory. Ecofeminism is almost seen as a subset of social ecology, although ecofeminists may not appreciate me saying that. But it's similar again in the concerns about the role of hierarchical dominance and how it links to the environment. The patriarchal basis of ecofeminism is, the The patriarchal basis of the majority of societies, according to ecofeminists, is responsible for the global environmental crisis. And they argue that an overhaul, again, of ideology and society's institutions is actually required. Although there are a number of different approaches that ecofeminists take, the central theme that links them is this idea of dualism. The characteristics epitomized by the association between men and women, male and female. The traditional male-led ethical debate is based around realism and reason. This is placed in stark contrast to emotion, which is often associated with women. However, basing ethical frameworks on emotion presents a difficulty, since it is less amenable to issues of impartiality and universality than reason is. Examples of dualism that are founded on the premise of reason versus emotion are those of mind and body, mental versus physical, human versus nature, man versus woman, with the former held to be superior and the latter in each case. All the approaches to environmental ethics that I've mentioned have at their core the negative impact of industry in creating an environmental crisis. It is evident that industry and businesses are responsible for a significant proportion of the problems that we currently face from an environmental perspective. The economist Benjamin Friedman, pictured here, wrote a book in 2005 looked at the economic growth and the moral consequences of economic growth. And he argued that economic growth is the production of a combination of private and public goods by both market forces and public policy. Such growth should be broadly based and sustainable, thus involving necessarily a distribution and an environmental dimension. The policy aspect and the regulatory role of government delivers on one element of this. But however, it's market forces based on the consumer demands that is required to influence that second element, that of the environmental concerns. In a market economy, what the customer demands is paramount. And if the customer demands products and services based on environmentally sustainable practices and inputs, then ultimately that is what business will actually deliver. Each of us is a consumer. Each of us purchases food, clothes, shelter, transport. And on each occasion, we have choices as to whether we purchase environmentally friendly products and services, or we act in ways that sustain or encourage environmentally friendly activities and processes. Each time we do so, we make a moral and ethical decision that influences the market. We can make such decisions as individuals, as families, as communities, or in the influence we exert within our places of work, whether as an employee or as a manager. At all of these levels, individual, family, community, and governments, moral issues may be addressed and apply, but probably not to the same extent as within religious communities. One of the characteristics of religious communities is that they commonly promote a code and set of ethical principles that are used to guide individuals and communities in their daily life. Where such religious principles are not applied, then more base behaviours may go unchecked, to the detriment of others, including families, communities, and other social groups. Hence, in social groupings, we do actually need moral and ethical principles and guidelines to help each of us manage behaviour to accepted norms. The corporate philosopher Roger Steer argues that there are three consciences: rule compliance, social and principled consciences, and these are all crucial for morality to function. Interestingly, in a global survey of 162 countries involving 20,000 people, he had a look and asked questions about moral ethicability. His results suggest that nations having a low moral standing, and the UK came out as one of the lowest in all the English-speaking nations, are those that are associated with a low participation in religious faiths. Also, the industries that are most associated with environmental problems, those involved in energy, in chemicals, in oil and gas, automobiles, and even in my own area of interest, technology, are the businesses whose employees have the lowest moral ethicability scores. So the people who are in these major businesses are the major polluters Also, the staff, the employees, have low moral ethicability scores. So what can we conclude from all of this? Well, innovation and technologies that arise from innovation have ensured economic growth, but they have also caused economic and environmental problems that have created the environmental crisis we now face. While environmental ethics was derived from a raised public perception of the concerns and problems created by technology, not least chemical pesticides, and I referred to Silent Spring at the beginning, the discipline of environmental ethics has itself concentrated our efforts on understanding the importance of role of moral standing and of creating new societal and moral frameworks integrating their own philosophy. Rather than this, and I talk about it in terms of a limited perspective, it could be argued it might be more productive to consider those moral frameworks that already exist, namely religious frameworks. Given that there is evidence to suggest that those individuals with religious faith are more ethical than those who do not have such faith, it is of key significance because it suggests the great faiths of the world provide a moral and institutional framework for addressing environmental ethics. It is also clear that where individuals work also relates to the ethical standing of any particular institution. For instance, you would, Miss Reem here from work with Greenpeace, charitable people who work in charities have a higher moral standing and higher moral ethicability score than anybody working in industry. So where you work is actually important, and it does not bode well that some of the key polluters are also those organisations populated by individuals with low moral ethicability scores. While government may set the agenda for industry with regard to meeting basic environmental regulatory standards, it's ultimately the consumer who will drive change within the business practices of industry, driving them towards sustainability. Individuals are absolutely key to environmental sustainability. As consumers, as to key influences within a business community, and through engagement of the issues through application of religious principles and morals. Religious faiths offer the most likely prospect for full engagement and commitment to sound environmental principles and provide a route by which individuals can dramatically influence the future of our planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dent.
شكرا جزيلا.
I think the ambiguity of technology with respect to the crisis of the environment, the dual aspect of the role, both positive and negative, or rather negative and positive, and for also pointing out the crucial importance, of course, of the individual, of the person, and the importance and the effectiveness of religious foundation for this ethics vis-à-vis the environment. Our next speaker is Dr. Djamel Mefaredj, who comes to us from Algeria, from the University of Constantine, where he teaches philosophy. And Dr. Mefaredj is going to speak to us about environmental ethics and monotheistic religions. Dr. Mefaredj. Thank you.
In the name of Allah, peace be upon you. In the outset, I would like to thank the organizers and would like to thank them for giving me the opportunity to address you. I will talk about environmental ethics and the relationship between ethics and the ecological problem. Of course, the relationships between ethics and ecological problem starts with talking about the reasons behind the ecological problem. We cannot talk about solutions without first discussing or diagnosing the reasons. And frankly speaking, we have to approach in identifying the reasons. There's a physical approach, and those of the physical approach believe that the reasons behind the ecological problem are economical, physical issues, and there is also an idealistic approach, and those who believe that the problem behind the ecological problems are people's belief and their ethics. We will focus on the second approach, which is related to the ethics and ecological problem, and those of the who work on of this approach believe that values have a critical role in identifying our relationship with nature, which means that what define our behavior towards nature are the values and ethics. And this theory, which see that our beliefs controls our attitude and behavior towards nature. The American historian Dean Martz is the founder of this approach. Dean Martz, who believe that our behavior and ethics control the environment and the surroundings. He believe and he see that the responsible behind the current ecological problem is religion, and he believed that Christianity was behind the current ecological problem. Why? Because he sees that the Christian text is a defined relationship of a human with environment, and he selected some texts from the Bible, and he interpret these texts as follows. There are texts. I'm gonna give you some text that Lynn White relied on. The first text, as mentioned in the Bible, he says Allah blessed them, and he says them that beget and enjoy the earth and benefit from the blessings I gave you. And Allah says that another text that we create people look like us, but they used or misused the blessings of Allah. The third text, Allah created man as a man, on the appearance of a man, and White believe that these texts from the Bible is the one that gave justification to man to control the environment. And the reason behind the ecological problem, according to White, is the text, the religious text, and he talks about all religious, but he focuses on Christianity, and he says that some texts gave legitimacy to misuse or to control the environment. It seems like Allah giving authority to mankind to exploit the environment, and this led to the arrogant attitude towards the nature. The main reason that the religious texts gave legitimacy to man to control or to exploit the nature, and Christianity in specific. And on another aspect, Lent believed that monotheist religious contributed when they banished the gods, the former gods from environment. Also, this has created, which means the one God that came with the monotheist religious replaced all the old gods were before. So this new sacred nature by itself has contributed, according to White, to the current ecological crisis. This is Lean White position, but it's not the only position. There are other and several positions. And Lean White approach, many people has joined him. For example, James Lovelock and Matthew Soley and Edward Goldsmith and Michias Eliade and Michel Serre and others. All of those, they have the same belief that monotheist religious, by expelling the gods that resides in nature, contributed to the ecological crisis. That's in addition to the text that Lean White mentioned, which he believed give justification to mankind. And when Allah classified his creation and put man on the top of this hierarchy, gave him the legitimacy and authority to exploit the earth and be arrogant. Generally speaking, without going into details, according to White, we may say that Christianity is the origin for the ecological crisis. And why he focuses in Christianity, although he believes that all monotheist religions contributed to this crisis. And we will see if we have remaining time that Lean White interpret the text, misinterpret these texts, and then the replies came from Muslim and Christian scholars. Lean focused on Christianity because, according to him, Christianity was the main reason behind the Western ideology, behind the Western ideology. So this theory did not pass without discussion, and here we may refer to Louis Marguerre, who replied to White, and he said that there are different cultures who were not impacted by Christianity or were not influenced by Christianity, and yet they harmed the nature and the environment. Of course, there are many actually response, and we may also mention many of them. However, because of time limitation or restrictions, we may say that relating to the religious or monotheist, we have the Islamic and the Muslim and the Judaism responses, and there are many organizations who were created to respond to White's theory, and they all say that the interpretation and the theory of White is incorrect. And when Allah gave the man this status and gave him make him responsible of this earth, was an honoring for the human. Of course, this vicegerency was given to man. So, and the responses were in three aspects. The first one was political, and that was manifested in the green peace. And there are also some philosophical movements was focused on the green awareness. And concerning the Christian world, there was also ecological movement, well-known movement, no need to mention. And the Islam world also, the Muslim scholars defended and responded to White theories. And here we might mention, and according to the documents I have, the first text for Yusuf al-Qaradawi about the environment, and there was also Abdul Majid al-Najjar who responded to White theories. And these papers responded. These were Islamic response and provide solutions in what's called the green jihad, and this is not political. The green jihad is represented in the Muslims' behavior towards or attitude towards environment, and Islam, frankly speaking, provide with us a large or many legislations in this. To counter or to face this problem, there are religious replies and responses, because lean white has insulted the religious, and there are also ethical responses represented in the appearance of some philosophies, ethical philosophies, and these ethical philosophies focused on the value or the concept of value, and which the things that push us to respect nature are not religious and text of religious, but the nature itself, because it's an original value. So this is what make us defend the environment and protect the environment. So all the ethical philosophies that stand to defend the ecological crisis, they all went back to the values. They relied on value, and they say that we need to generalize the concept of values, which means that the value also is not limited to one individual, but the ideological approaches try to give value to the to generalize these concepts to nature and to other creatures. Of course, there are many philosophies in this, but there was a disagreement in these philosophies relating a specific issue, which is what make us, what are the reasons that make us give a genuine value for the nature. There were some attempts in a pragmatic philosophies which believe that what make us respect value is not because values has a genuine value by itself, but nature can be perceived as a fulfillment for our needs, which is an interest value. But of course, if we look to the nature as a resource, does not determine our respect, undermine our respect for the value. If nature fulfill our as a complementary value, but that does not undermine its value. So if we want to conclude, we might say that according to the philosophies that I discussed, we might consider the values as a main or a key concept, because our beliefs, our values control our look to the nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mefaredj. Thank you above all to engage this critique of monotheistic religions from some philosophical quarters, and this misunderstanding of the role of mankind as Khalifatullah, as vicegerent, as a pretext to exploit nature. And also thank you for reminding us that transcendence, or the emphasis on transcendence, is not exclusive of the consideration of immanence. Our last speaker is Professor Osman Bakr, who is chair and professor and director of Sultan Omar Ali Safiuddin Center for Islamic Studies at the University of Brunei Darussalam in Brunei. And Dr. Bakr is going to talk to us about religious values and environmental ethics, an Islamic perspective. Dr. Bakr.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum.
In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful, peace be upon you all.
Inviting me to this seminar. conference. The title of my topic is Religious Values and Environmental Ethics, an Islamic Perspective. As you can see, there are many similarities between my topic and the previous three topics. So my problem is the three previous speakers have used most of my points. Anyway, I will try to say something a bit different. And when this topic was given to me by the organizers, I interpret the topic in such a way that you would like me to speak about, to provide some thought about the role of religious values as a source of ideas, as a source of solutions to the problem of environmental ethics. My subtitle, Islamic Perspective, means that I will concentrate more on the Islamic views, although what I'm going to say are also relevant to the other religious perspectives. In fact, as my response to the keynote address this morning about the fact that our world, our contemporary world, is a very multi-religious world, and therefore the question of how can we make religion play the role when there are so many differences between religious values. But on the positive side, despite that appearance of problem, there have been a lot actually of interfaith, interreligious dialogues taking place on the subject of environmental ethics. More can be done. What comes out of this dialogue is that there are common views. Of course, there are differences, but there are also many common views which will allow us as the human community to take a common stand against on the subject of on the subject of environmental issues. There are two key terms in my topic, whether it is in English or in Arabic. In English, the environmental ethics, religious values. There are differences of perspectives, differences of views on these two terms. And of course, in the case of the Arabic also, we understand differently the question of environmental ethics. Akhlaqiyatul bi'ah, question of, for example, even the question of the, of course, we have, in case of many Muslims, it is common word. They have heard of the word, the Arabic word, akhlaqiyah in a more frequent way, because that is related to the word akhlaq. But in case of bi'ah, well, I mean, many Muslims who are non-Arabic speaking, that is not a peculiar, it's not a familiar word, and they will try to check the usage of this term, especially in classical times. Since I have to provide an Islamic perspective, of course, I have to make some perhaps more references to the Arabic words. Now, my first point here, my first point of discussion here that I wanted to convey is that because in the way Muslims think about many issues, they would like to provide a kind of continuity between the pre-modern times and the modern times. And this idea of continuity between ideas in classical Islamic thought and contemporary thought, that would be a good thing. And I would say that if we are to analyze the term akhlaqiyatul bi'ah in terms of the words, then there is continuity. There is that epistemological continuity. In English, ethics, environmental ethics is defined as both a branch of knowledge as an academic discipline, but it also used in the sense of referring to moral consciousness, the moral conscience that exists in each individual human being with regard to issues of environment, these two. The same thing can be said about the akhlaqiyatul biyah. It can be viewed as an academic discipline as well as a state of moral conscience. So that I want to do, just to simply say that the term will remind us of this continuity with the classical Islamic discourse on that subject. Now the question of we also know that in English language, ethics is defined as a branch of knowledge that deals with moral principles. The key word here is moral principles, governing a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity either at an individual or a collective level. This definition of ethics fits well into the epistemological framework of Al-Moctar that we have just described. From the perspective of classification of knowledge, we may view akhlaqiyatul biyah as a branch of Al-Moctar that results from the application of principles of the latest science to the domain of environmental issues. This means that although akhlaqiyatul biyah may be treated as independent science with distinctive practical applications and public policy implications, we could hardly do full justice if we fail to mention that many principles of ethics and conceptual issues embodied in Al-Moctar are highly relevant to environmental ethics. And from the viewpoint of Muslim institutions of higher learning who teach about environmental ethics, I think it is very important to realize that the classical Al-Moctar continues to be an important source of moral principles pertaining to environmental ethics. Now, as for the word environment itself needs some explanation. I'm sorry for that, it's one point I would do. Now, the question here, personal ethics is the core component of Al-Moctar. In the Islamic perspective, however, personal and public ethics are basically shaped by the same set of religious values, although within the domain of public ethics itself, different subsets of ethical values are known to come into prominent play in different public sectors. For example, different ethical values are being emphasized in each of the domain of medical ethics and public health, business ethics, and environmental ethics. The implication is that personal ethics has an important role to play in the realization of good public environmental ethics. The word environment itself needs explanation. Environment is usually understood as being of two kinds. One is natural environment, which existed prior to man and which continues to exist unless it is altered or transformed by a continuous process of human intervention over a considerable period of time. In religious terms, this environment is believed to be part of God's creation. Another is, of course, is a built environment, which human beings created to surround themselves with out of various diverse needs, primarily and necessarily out of objects available in the natural environment itself. Central to man's built environment are the living homes, which he and his fellow human beings have built to protect themselves from dangers inherent in the natural environment. Indeed, man's home is his first and most immediate environment, and by virtue of it also is most important. The rest of the built environment is the varied human constructions that have been put in place in the pursuit of civilization. To be more conceptually precise, however, some classical philosophers of civilization in Islam posit a third kind of environment, which is viewed as intermediate in nature between the virgin natural environment and the built environment. This third kind of environment is understood as intermediate in the sense that it is the product of the natural and human roles combined. The oldest, the most important, and also the most well-known of such natural human products is agriculture. The very word agriculture, derived from a combination of agro, meaning soil, and culture, human nature, displays proof of it as a product of natural and human roles. In the context of our discussion of environmental ethics, this way of classifying environments may prove to be more advantageous or more fruitful. In this case, we will then be able to see two different qualitative impacts of human activities on the natural environment, namely the impact of the built environment, which is considerable, and the impact of the intermediate environment. In the light of this observation, we will be moved to make extra efforts to ensure that all the three kinds of environment are ecologically sound. The practical implication here is clear. We need, for example, to put in place policies on agriculture and built environment, including town and city planning, that would meet the best standard of environmental ethics as insisted by Islamic ecology itself. As for the use of the word, those here who are more knowledgeable than me, but used in Arabic, if I may be wrong, and to be corrected here, looking at the usage of bia in the classical Arabic, it refers more to the built environment. The question here, that is no problem. In other words, it's just that I think in using that term, we need to refer to different understandings of the word nature in Islamic context. Now, in modern times, however, issues of environmental ethics do not just arise from human activities related to the built environment. Wars and with their weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, chemical, and biological, and agricultural technology are also important sources of issues of environmental ethics. Biotechnological activities also pose a new challenge to environmental ethics. My next point of want to find in my paper is the question of religious values and the question of what do qiyam diniya conceptual issues that are raised by that. Religions are structured differently, and accordingly, their respective value systems are differently structured as well. In Islamic perspectives, values are not structured according to the religious and non-religious dichotomy. In the context of the overall teachings of the religion of Islam, it would be viewed as problematic if one were to maintain a clear distinction between religious values and values that are not religious. In accordance with its central doctrine of At-Tawheed, which interrelates and unifies all domains and all levels of cosmic life, in particular human life, Islam prefers to classify values according to the structure of the human constitution itself. Metaphysically and theologically, the ultimate source of all values is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with its many attributes and qualities. What we call human values is none other than the reflection or the projection of the divine attributes and qualities on the plane of human existence. This affirmation is based on the teaching that God, Allah Ta'ala, has created man in his image. In this particular way of looking at values, we may say that there is no real value that could not be traced back to its divine source. If by religious we mean that which is connected in some way or other to God, then from Islamic theological perspective, there is no value that could not be regarded as religious. In this sense, all religious values are real, true, and useful, and all real, true, and useful values are religious. If, for some particular purpose, certain values are omitted for consideration, then it can be assumed that, or it can be assured that the real reason for the omission is not because those values are deemed as not religious, but because they are viewed not as relevant as the other values for the purpose at hand. This approach to the treatment of values, particularly their prioritization for application to solve problems, help avoid marginalization of relevant values or even their omission altogether. The question is, in practice, when we say we want to apply religious values, what are these religious values? We need to identify that. It is not very clear as far as the problem of environmental ethics is concerned.
Coming close to the end, so if you could.
Oh, okay, yes.
Thank you.
All right. In case I'll just the question of searching for principles, because we said just now that in the definition of environmental ethics, it is important to identify the principles governing that science. Well, I'm saying in my paper, I refer to the principles as comprising both ecological principles and moral ethical principles. In the Islamic perspective, ethics is to be governed and shaped both by the theology of nature and the higher purposes of the divine law, yani maqasid al-sharia, that have been developed out of the teachings of the Quran. Basically, to conclude, in fact, I discussed that I prefer to classify values according to the approaches of many scholars in the past. There are 4 different types of values, religious values, according to quote, that we need to apply. First is the spiritual values. Number 2, it is intellectual, rational, scientific values. Number 3, it is moral, ethical, legal values. And number 4, artistic, technological values. All these values are relevant to the formulation of environmental ethics enterprise solutions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bakr. Thank you very much for reminding us of the philosophical and theological implications of some of the key terms which are at stake here. And thank you above all for emphasizing the integrative of the Tawhidic Unitarian Islamic view of the relationship between God and nature. So now we have about 45 minutes for questions. I would ask, please, the audience to try to formulate the questions as concisely as possible, remembering that brevity is the soul of wit, and coming to the point as quickly as possible so as to give more time to our speakers to respond. Thank you very much. Yes, the lady.
Okay.
Thank you.
السلام عليكم. سؤالي موجه
My question is for Dr. Djamel from Algeria. You said that the religious values, I mean the monotheists, when they put the man on the hierarchy, allowed him to exploit nature in an uneconomical way or in a consumerism way. However, when we look to what occurred, that these values remained for thousands of years, Judaism, Christianity, and later Islam. Man could not destroy nature, but he destroyed the nature with the cutting-edge technologies, or even with Enlightenment era and afterwards. So the questions, how can we handle these advanced technological capabilities that evolved after those? Shall we seize it, suspend it, and ask man not to evolve because he is the one who exploit the nature, he is the one who built the electronics and everything? Or shall we maybe comply these companies and individuals who innovate or create these destructive innovative, and how maybe ask him to comply him to maybe create these technologies in a way that doesn't harm the environment, or maybe to ask them to spend or invest in scientific research to reduce the harms of the technology. Thank you very much. frankly speaking, that the point of view that I discuss is not my point of view. It's Lean White's point of view, Lean White, and I disagree totally with his point of view, and he actually insulted and the Christian texts and religion in general, and he put the religion responsible for the ecological crisis, and he maybe believed that with the text in Bible, it looks like a carte blanche for man to exploit nature. However, in monotheist religious, man is vicegerent, and he is trustworthy for the environment. And now to the second part of your question, among the main reasons behind ecological crisis is the Anwar philosophy, who believed in the evolution, an infinite evolution, which and the dominant belief was that nature in itself was like a monster that need to be tamed, and the man, after this, dominated environment as a beast. No one thought that environment would be harmed and would be disabled, and we discovered that this beast, that the philosophy and enlightenment era promote for, we discovered that this beast is just any other creature, could be disabled, could be harmed and damaged. And for the question related to the evolution, many philosophers believe that this evolution is not a linear one. There are some it's not an advanced one, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau philosophy for Jean-Jacques Rousseau said that the scientific advancements at the same time accompanied by an ethical deterioration. So it's not parallels. There's no scientific advancement accompanied by ethical one, but in reality the scientific advancement is accompanied by an ethical deterioration. So the more man advanced scientifically, the more he is ethically deteriorate. And Kant is some kind in between, and he says that ethics, the field of ethics, is separate, totally separate from science, and he differentiated by two types of mind: the practical mind and the theoretical mind. And science and scientific, it took a place apart from ethics, and ethical also advancement occur apart from science. So we have 3 point of views, and in my own or personal point of view, that science and evolution and ethics cannot be apart from each other. And so this evolution need to be aligned and goes in the same direction. And now the humanity now awakes and discover that this beast, which is the environment, as was described by Hegel and other philosophers, modern philosopher, the man just disappeared, that nature is just a creature like us and it could be disabled. So we need to reconsider our thinking. And shukran.
The first row, please. The gentleman on the first row, please.
تفضل.
On the first row, yes.
شكرا.
I would just make a comment, which is when the Muslims talk about the relationship between environment and religion, usually they remind us of verses and hadith that we already know. But from a practical point of view, what the Muslims have contributed after 14th centuries, uh, practical things. So we see the Greenpeace organization without any religion. Now it has a bigger weight and they impact legislations and laws. The question now isn't time yet. Isn't it about time where scholars and or scholar from the text and the context to sit together in order maybe to contribute more efficiently to impact policies and have a bigger impact. So we need the contribution, the practical contribution of Islam, and the first speech of Reem, they talked about the situation of the Arab world and the Muslim world from environmental on the environmental level. So this is a shame actually. شكرا جزيلا لكم. من يود أن يجيب على هذا السؤال؟ الدكتور الحجري سيتصدى. دكتور
الإسلامي.
Then the Muslim in our religion, we need to believe in what we do, and hence this behavior since the beginning is not only to serve the environment. All humanity suffer from the lack of promoting this, which is believing in what we do. And one of the Muslims' experiences in the past, what's called the Himam, which is a system that goes 2,000 years ago. That was a very sophisticated system to protect the environment. Al-Hima, which is the protection in English language, and it has introduced the concepts and the rules for people care about the environment. And this Hima or protection was acknowledged in many international arena as one of the best systems in order to protect the environment, because it has integrated the man with environment. And some simple examples and examples make things clear. If we now look to the whole life, whether blessings in all blessings of Allah, we can see that they are all balanced, and they correct the environment fix itself by itself. However, the man who is granted by sense and sanity doesn't do the same. For example, from the Arab world, if you leave the camels in the desert, the camel will go and eat a little from one plant and little from another. They don't consume the whole plant. So if we linked this creature, the camel, this creature is in line with the environment and protect the environment without sense, so if the man takes a bird from one environment, from one inhabitant to another, that bird might create negative impacts and affect other creatures. So if we look to the life, to the nature itself, the sea cleans the waste of the sea and throw it on the shore, and the atmosphere also try to reduce the consumed gases. However, the man and every element has its limitations, and if exceed these limitations, the problem starts. And the man, unfortunately, he exceeded his and stepped over his borders. The man with its consumerism, especially not on individual level, on leadership levels, and the countries that has started to support these consumerism to generate dollars without even considering the coming generation. So there's a discrepancy, there's a deficit in the man system which cannot be corrected without promoting ethics and going back to the methodology that strike a balance between technological advancement, which is actually a demand, and Islam calls for more advancement. However, at the same time, we need to have we have to have ethics that translate technology to be aware of the environment and nature.
On the fourth row, please.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes. My question would be for Dr. Al-Hajari and Mr. Dundee, but also taking into account that we have the honor to have Shark Al-Adawi with us today and Mr. Talak Ramada from the CILE. You mentioned the verse of the Holy Quran that gives a contribution to how to preserve the environment. I wish to thank you on that. But I want to come back to the role of financial institutions, which have a direct impact on the business, on the behavior of human and corporates in this part of the world. The international banks have adopted about 10 years ago already equitable principles that governs their behavior vis-à-vis financing large projects. What about the principle that applies to the Islamic financial institutions? And don't you think that we should, with the Center of Islamic and Legislation and Ethics, work on a code of ethics for Islamic financing, preserving the environment?
Who would like to address this question? Would you like to address this question? Dr. Dent? Dr. Dent? Yes.
Yes, I'll have a go. I think everything there is an evolution towards the ideal goal, and whether that's in my own area of research, it started out as we talked about control of the environment. We then talked about management with regard to the technologies we're using, and then we talked about integration. Everything has to go through a number of evolutionary stages to get to the ideal point. Our financial institutions, in my mind, and having just raised a large amount of money for an environmentally friendly company, I know what it's like trying to raise funds from bodies, financiers, who are not really fully engaged yet with what we need to achieve with regard to the environment and the technologies that are going to be more environmentally friendly. They're seen as having a large risk associated with them. So I think we can't expect everything to happen immediately. There is a process for which we go through. With regard to Islamic financial institutions, I don't feel I'm qualified to actually to say, and I'll leave it there.
Yeah. Dr. Al-Hajari, would you like to address this question?
What is the main question?
The question of the financial institution, the control of the. Maybe we could perhaps jump to another question. Yes. Here? Yes. Yes. Yes, sir. On the first row.
Hello.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And my question is for Dr. David Dent. I'd like to thank you so much for the presentation. And I'd just like to say hypothetically that if all of us now have agreed as consumers to choose the other option, the alternative option, which is the eco-friendly option, how far do you believe that this option is available for us in terms of durability, accessibility, and cost? Thank you.
That's a very, very interesting and important question.
I think you have.
Sorry, am I not switched on? It's a very important question, and it's, at the moment, no, there is not available environmentally friendly options every time. But it is still a case of, if that is what is demanded, then eventually that is what the market will deliver. Now, what happens in practice is that governments try to drive policy and regulations to push businesses in that direction of delivering sustainable choices. And I think one of the interesting ethical issues that I see at the moment actually occurring is that Western governments are pushing their businesses towards developing environmentally friendly technologies and products and services, and because there is a good sound economic reason for doing so. But that's also then leaving behind some of the less developed nations who are still working with old technologies, but because they can maintain their labour costs as low, they are actually able to still deliver products and have economic growth that, if you like, is in competition with the West. And I think there's some interesting ethical issues as to who has greater rights here. Is it the need to have growing populations in China that have low labour costs, therefore are able to produce large amount of products but not necessarily in environmental friendly ways? Or is it in the West where we're pushing for environmentally sustainable products and services, yet there's a reason behind that, and that's for economic growth purposes and global competition. So I think from an ethical point of view, there are very many interesting ways of looking at this. I don't necessarily have the solutions to those problems, but I think over time, the answer to your question is we will have greater and greater choice as time goes on.
Thank you very much. We need to have questions from the left. I'm sorry, there has been a certain disparity with the right. We need to give...
Excuse me.
Yes.
It's me.
Yes.
In here.
Yeah. Yes. Please.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I want to say, of course, I would like to start by thanking the panelists and thank the CILE for this conference. I am interested, actually, and this is a comment. This ecology for some people is considered a luxury. Just thinking about, just caring about environment, considered as a luxury because they are preoccupied by other things like maybe surviving or providing for this family. So it's quite important to take the reality and not to be idealistics. So we need to care, but we should not have double standards. We need from Islam to help in ethics, and we don't want it to help in another domains. This separation is quite crucial and impact Muslims in Islam from my point of view, and others we cannot take one aspect and leave others. As Muslims wearing hijabs, we obey Allah and we also follow Allah's directives, and Allah direct us not to be extravagant with water. So we need to respect everything. We cannot take parts of Islam and leave other parts. So I have attended a conference about ethics, and there was the International or the Universal Ethics Organization, and this organization wanted to put a set of ethics according to their point of view. So this is important. My question now is for Dr. Al-Hajari. I wanted to say that among your recommendations, you mentioned school curriculums, and I was a board of a trustee in one of the schools, and I believe this is crucial. However, it's quite important to have Muslims, imams that talk about this in Al-Masajid because this is important. Indeed, This is not a luxury. Environment is not a luxury, and we want a decent life for simple people, because destroying environment is an offense to the rights of these simple people and the blessing of Allah. So any ecological issue should keep in mind the integrity of the simple people. So these blessings of Allah need to be protected for the coming generations. Of course, these in the time being, the major companies that actually promote for consumerism are the main reason for this problem. So environment need to be protected, and all people should benefit from the blessings of Allah.
Dr. Ramadan, you have a question.
You want to...
Oh, you want to continue? Yes, you can.
بخصوص قضية الترف، الحقيقة السؤال مهم. كانت الفيلسوف الألماني معروف عنده كتاب اسمه نقد ملكة الحكم، وفي هذا الكتاب يذهب إلى فرضية معينة، يقول أنه إنسان، نفترض أنه إنسان يعيش في لوحده في جزيرة بمعزل عن البشر، ويتساءل: هل هذا الإنسان الذي يعيش في جزيرة لوحده هل يميل إلى تزيين محيطه؟ جواب كانت هو أن هذا الإنسان الذي يعيش في جزيرة وحده لن يميل إلى تزيين محيطه إلا إذا عاش في وسط البشر. دونك الذي يدفع الإنسان إلى تزيين محيطه في الحقيقة والاهتمام ببيئته هو أنه عندما يميل إلى العيش مع البشر، والدافع الذي يدفعه إلى المحافظة على البيئة هو الدافع الترفي، يعني ما هوش دافع أساسي. هذا الأطروحة التي يقدمها لي كانت في الحقيقة أنه يعني درستها باش نقدمها إلى مؤتمر معين، وعرضت الفكرة على زوجتي، يعني عرضت أمامها تصور كانت، ونبهتني إلى مسألة في الحقيقة أساسية، وقالت لي بأنه أن كانت عندما نظر في هذه المسألة هل الطبيعة يعني هي ترف أو شيء أساسي حسب وجهة نظر كانت، نبهتني إلى مسألة، وهي أن كانت عندما فكر في هذه المسألة وقدم إجابته كان يفكر بمنطق الرجال ولم يفكر بمنطق النساء، بمعنى أن المرأة من طبيعتها تميل إلى تزيين محيطها سواء عاشت لوحدها في الجزيرة أو في غيرها. دونك هنا في الحقيقة يقول لنا أنه التفكير كان في مسائل الطبيعة أو في الإيكولوجيا هو تفكير عنصري، بمعنى آخر أنه فكر بمنطق معين ولم يفكر. لو أنه فكر بمنطق النساء ربما كانت إجابته بطريقة أخرى، وربما كان كتابه هو الأساسي هذا نقد ملكة الحكم ربما كان يعني قدم فيه شيء آخر لو كان فكر بمنطق النساء.
We have a question for Tariq Ramadan. From Tariq Ramadan, yes.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بارك الله فيكم. أريد أن أشكركم على المداخلات. أنا عندي سؤال معين وخصوص.
I have a question. David Dent said something important at the outset.
وأنا أرى
In terms of the environment now, I see a problem with the approach. We try to link the Islam ethics and the problems in the environment. Today we cannot provide any solution without linking the problems of the environment and the economy. Is it possible today? And we find this in the West. We speak about environment and individual values and social values in the West, but What's missing here is the approach, the linking between the values in the economic field and the environmental field. And this linkage is really lacking in the Islamic perspective. So we need values in the economy and the objectives of the economy, and the environment and the objectives of the environment. But linking between the sciences is lacking from a contemporary Muslim point of view, and Allah knows best. Indeed, this is the bottom line. If we look at the climate summits, they are one of the main big ones. About 180 countries participate, and they don't speak about the environment. They speak about the economy, because economy is the bottom line and the foundation, because consumerism is very linked to the environment. And we see a group of people who own half of the bounties of nature and the wealth, and you also find that there are economic issues and their impact are significant on man and even on research. So we should look at the economy and how will this economy become an economy based on values to where it affects the aspects of life and the life of humankind.
There is a mismatch there. We do not have connectivity between the values and environmental values yet, and the way business is conducted. But going back again to a point I made earlier, I think that will come with time, simply because economies are going to be so dependent on finding a solution to that. So that we talked about, Ms. Reem talked earlier about corporate social responsibility. I think we're already moving beyond the idea of just corporate social responsibility to this idea that environmental ethics has to be fully integrated into business. It's not something that's on the side that we do as an extra. It's something that has to be fully integrated within business. Once it's fully integrated within business, it will become a full part of the way we undertake and drive our economy.
Yes. We have a question here, on second row here. The second row.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.
In the name of Allah, I thank you for focusing on these issues. I have a question about the e-waste. What are the symptoms of that? Can you give us examples? Especially that electronics nowadays are dominating our lives. Thank you. The harms, electronic harms, are multiple and many. If we leave alone the ethical side of this, let's focus on the environmental aspects. As I said, the electronic tools available to us have a lot of hazardous material and minerals which are poisonous, and they could lead to cancer and kidney failure. Even the vibrations and electromagnetic waves in these instruments have invisible impacts where man cannot even see them, in addition to their psychological and worry impacts. So their impacts are so many. That's why we see a lot of researches now about these electronic instruments. Some risks have not even been discovered yet because these are considered modern equipment and tools. So there should be a study to discover the impact and harms in the long run for man use of these tools, which are rather important and necessary.
Actually, for organizing this event. And to be honest, I would like to tell you something very sacred. When I saw actually the advertisement about this conference and the theme, I thought it is not something interesting for me because my area, it is Islamic finance and ethical investment. And when I came here now, I found Dr. Tariq Ramadan. He mentioned about economy. And the one question in the back here talking about the role of the financial institutions on playing a role on the environment. And as well, one question here in the left here talking about the link between the ideal Islamic society and the Muslim society, which you actually, I would like to have like only a contribution here, if you might say. The role of the Islamic finance, it have a big link to the ethics and the morality. Because the Islamic finance has a 5 pillars of Islamic finance. The 5 pillars, if you look at it, it is the band of the interest. There is no gambling. There is no unethical product you go to invest. All your investment should be backed by asset. And if you look for these 5 pillars of Islamic finance, you found the root causes of what we have now in the financial crisis, which is the economic crisis. The root causes is not only the greedy from the financial institution, but it is the lack of these 5 principles. Therefore, we need actually to make sure we have this link. As Dr. Ramadan mentioned, we have this link between the economy, and what I mean by economy, the Islamic economy, which is a real economy. It is not what is the economy, which we said now, Islamic banking, Islamic finance, which I did the research, and they found actually 80% of the Islamic financial institution does not provide an Islamic product.
What is your question? Excuse me. What is your question?
The question is how, for David Tennant actually is his about the ethically, how we can bring the religions and the charity organizations to play a role as well in the business orientation and the business ethics when they go to take the decision about buying or selling or investing. You mentioned about the morality in the Islamic institutions more on the ethicality. The ethicality more for the charity organization than the normal business. For how we can bring this ethical Islamic or religion value to the business by investing. Thank you.
I'm quite happy to have a go at answering this question. For me, if we go back to Roger Steer's work, and I talked about his ethicability study, the banking industry in the overall, this was globally in 162 countries, came out very good on rule compliance, but not so very good on social conscience or principled conscience. So yes, in obeying rules, yes, the banks in the West at least have certainly been doing the right things. But I think the other aspect that comes back from Roger Steer's study is the people who actually go into different industries now, go into an industry where they essentially feel that they are among colleagues who have similar values to themselves. And I think sadly, there are too many of our key institutions that have got people with moral values that do not live up to the needs of the industry that they're actually in. Now, this is why I have some faith in religious faith delivering something here, because I think when we talk about religious faith and religious values having an impact, I think there's a role for every individual who works within any business to make sure that those values that they hold true to be upheld. And that's when talking to their colleagues, it might be talking to their bosses and whatever. And I think there is an awareness now that this has been lacking. So I think, if you like, there's an opening, there's an understanding that there is a greater need. Therefore, there needs to be more voices making that claim and saying, this isn't good enough, I have ownership, I work within this business sector, I do not want to be associated with these negative values, I want to be associated with the values that I hold true. And again, I talk about evolution and development. I think because of the financial crisis, it has raised an awareness globally in ways that it's not been done before. There are still major problems with our financial institutions, but I think now they are open to criticism, and now is the time for people who are involved, who do have good religious values, to make their claim.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Since we have the honor of the presence of Dr. Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi, so I would like now to
been waiting for about half an hour. Can I just say something, please?
All right.
Okay. First of all, I want to welcome Professor Bakr, my old colleague from Georgetown main campus, and welcome to Qatar here. It's good to see you again, sir. And secondly, I want to appreciate what Dr. Hajri was saying, and I want to say a story that maybe he will appreciate from what he presented. My work is on I'm a historian, so I work on court records. And you'd be surprised how much people in our societies long ago understood environment, understood ecology, and asked for a clean environment. I'm reminded in particular about the case in Alexandria from 18th century, in which the people came to court and asked that the guilds and the makers of stucco, gear, be moved from where they are because they were polluting the rivers and the waters and the air. And this is not a unique case. There are lots of cases like that, which shows that there was an actual understanding of environment. My question now comes to the modern period, where we find similar cases being taken to court and against, for example, particularly cement factories. And we found the courts actually voting for business, voting for the factories, or delaying in such a way that, so it's what is the responsibility of the state and what's the responsibility of law? This is the environment, or this is the question that I would like to add here, that there is a responsibility here regarding the legal system that has to stand against and to stand with the people, against pollution, and with the state in instituting the kind of laws that would, in fact, make sure to enforce this. Thank you.
Would any of our speakers would like to address this question? Yes.
طبعا هذه القضية في الحقيقة.
Of course, this issue is rather difficult because there are interests and requirements and development. Therefore, when applying sometimes those principles, these provisions sometimes take into consideration the interests of a certain sector. If we were to shut down this cement factory, then the impact will be more negative to society. So it is a rather difficult issue in terms of taking a decision. For example, the dam in Egypt, it has its impact on the environment, but if we were to measure the benefits of this Sadd al-Ali, or the dam in Egypt, we should take into consideration the priorities and the interests and the strategic factors, and thus sometimes those courts tend to favor those industries. But if justice is to be upheld, then we sometimes should take into consideration what is beneficial for the development.
الوقوع في
I just want to mention something very important, and the lady asked about the cement companies, and I want to say that the green economy and the sustainability has transformed into demand and business, and now sustainable development in itself now is selling and buying. So now this renewable energy and new energy, we think about pollution, but we never pay attention to the other trap, which is that sustainable development itself will be transformed to a new business or to a new economy where everything is sold and buy. So we don't want to fall in this trap where everything is a business. So now environment is a business. Thank you very much.
All the speakers and the audience, and I would like to give the concluding remarks to Sheikh Yusuf Karadawi, who is with us today.
In the name of Allah, blessing be upon Prophet Muhammad, our leader and our tutor and his companions and household and followers till the day of judgment. I will start by greeting you with the greeting of Islam, and which is peace, and peace be upon you. I would like to thank CILE, Center of Islamic Legislation and Ethics, for their second annual international conference and I didn't know that the theme is environment, but I and changing word, this what I ethics in a changing word. But however, environment is a critical issue where all nations in the north, east, west and south, all the communities are now concerned in environment, and for decades. And a few years back I attended an international conference in Jeddah, and a large number of people were invited to that conference in order to talk about Islam and environment, and I have delivered a paper and research which was published later on under the title of Caring About Environment in the Islamic Sharia, or from Sharia perspective. I chose this word caring, and which is an equal for protecting. So I thought then that caring for is better than protecting. Protecting seems like guarding, but caring, just like caring our children, and even caring for family and motherhood. So caring is a wider meaning, and caring environment from Islamic Sharia. So I wrote in that book what I believe, and the participants at that conference were interested in my book, and other people also were interested, and I believe that environment has a major importance, especially in relation to our center, the CILE, which is which Dr. Tariq Ramadan chair, caused this Center of Islamic Legislation and Ethics and Environment. We need to link Islamic legislation and environment, and whether the Islamic Sharia is contradicting with environment or is it in keeping with the environment. And frankly speaking, Islamic Sharia and everything mentioned in Islam, whether legislation, recommendation, guidance, teachings, everything in Islam aims to preserve, protect, care for the environment, and environment, whether a human environment, whether ecological or natural environment, cultural environment, all kind of environment is impacted or influenced by what's taking place around it. And whoever look to the Islamic legislation would find an unprecedented concern, and maybe our brothers who never read the teachings, if you read these teachings and Sharia, Islam Sharia, you would know how Islam cared about Sharia. And Dr. Djamel has provided some texts from Injil and Bible. And Bible is a small book which talk about Jesus and the Holy Quran. However, if you look to the Holy Quran and the Sunnah, which is the teachings of Prophet Muhammad, and even the Islamic legislations, the interpretations of the companions of Prophet Muhammad and the Muslims, leaders and imams, you will find a huge or a significant material about environment. And I believe that we need to benefit best use of these books available. And unfortunately, many of these books were not translated properly and require translation. Those who talk to us today in English language, I wanted them to know. And even those who speak in Arabic, they never read these books, the Islamic books, the valuable Islamic books. And this is a shame, because there seems to be a separation between the cultures. We don't read for each other. The culture do not go across borders, not even cross borders, even within the same community. People do not read. And this center, the CILE Center, may play a major role in bridging the gap between the cultures and bring people together between the constituents of the and translation is critical here. It's quite important. Islam has paid a huge attention. No words can summarize and can explain how Islam cared about environment. Dr. Saif has mentioned 2 texts, and he mentioned only one, which is corruption appeared in the land and earth as a result for the people's doings. But I haven't read the other text, which could be that Allah never change people's life if they don't change themselves from within. So we need our brothers to benefit what Islam has presented, what the Islam has contributed. Islam has prohibited us from corrupting the earth after the Reformation, because Allah has created a blessed earth that give us all kind of blessings, to eat, to wear, to plant, to benefit from all this. We need to exploit, but not to destroy. Prophet Muhammad, blessing be upon him, when he was asked to kill the dogs, because at the Medina the dogs were harming people, these dogs without owners, they were, and some said we kill these dogs, and Prophet Muhammad said that the dogs are themselves a nation. If they were not a nation, I would have ordered killing them. But dogs are a nation that just like other nations. This is a fact mentioned by the Holy Quran, and in a verse where Allah say that every single creature on the earth, bird or animal, are just nations like you, human. There's the nation of flies, there's the nation of spiders, there's the nations of roaches, of cats, of dogs, of ducks. Nations just like you, like a humanity. So it's a nation, and Allah has created them in what? How can you eliminate? How can you destroy such nations? It's God's creation. Man should protect animals, and Allah and Islam has protected animals. So how could you think of humans? So
استراليا أول ما ذهبوا
We saw the elimination of the Aboriginals in the US and in Australia. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, had dogs not been a nation just like you, I would have ordered you to eliminate them and kill them. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, says, and I hear speak about people who go to hunt in the GCC countries. Some of them kill birds and they leave them. They didn't eat them and they didn't benefit by them. So the Prophet warns against that, and he says, anyone who kills a bird for no purpose, then the bird will complain to Allah on the day of judgment, saying, oh Allah, this man has killed me for play, not really to benefit by killing me. He was just playing and aiming just to hit me, just for the fun of it, and not for a benefit to eat that bird or benefit from that bird. So the Prophet was keen on this issue. If we look at the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad in terms of using planting trees and building the earth and using green methods, many things are available in the teachings of Prophet Muhammad. I could have brought you books to read on those issues. In Islam, we have so many things in that regard. When I first read them, I never thought that in Islam those different and very intricate instructions in all fields that protect man, protect the earth, protect the air, and protect everything basically. So man should benefit from the earth and not harm the earth and not harm the plants or the animals or the creatures. People who fight one another and indiscriminately launch wars against each other. Look at Syria now and what's happening there. Man kills carelessly without taking into consideration the impact of the killing in terms of what he does to other creatures and other people. We as Muslims are proud of what is embedded in our faith, which calls on the Muslim to always be beneficial and useful. Anything that harms people is forbidden and illicit by Islam. You should not harm yourself and you should not harm others. So no harm to oneself and no harm to others. If you harm your neighbor or brother, even if you harm your enemy, even if that person is your enemy, do not try to harm that person with his life and harm him with anything. So everything should be very well calculated. Without talking more, This should suffice, and I ask Allah Almighty to help us all and guide us onto the straight path. Thank you all so much, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all.
Again, to all our speakers, to the audience, to Dr. Sher Karadawi, to all of you.
Thank you all indeed. Thank you, Dr. Log. Thank you for the panelists and the audience for the participation. And I welcome our big Sheikh Ahmed Al-Raisuni, who has joined us an hour ago. He is Deputy President of the International Federation of Muslim Scholars. So today we were honored to have the President and the Vice President. So we ask Allah to bless them. Now we will take a break to pray the afternoon and for lunch until 2:30. And the next topic, which will begin at 2:30, would be issues of man and woman. And our Sheikh, environment is one pillar of the four. We have environment, man and woman, and ethics of the media, and ethics of psychology. So what we discuss now is the environment. Later on we will discuss the issue of men and women, and then after that the other two topics. The issue which will start at 2:30 is the issues of man and woman, and Tawakkol Karman will be a speaker. She is the first Arab woman to obtain the Nobel Peace Prize, in addition to other speakers. So please accept our invitation to lunch. Thank you all so much.